Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tough Topics. I'm your host, Vonnie Sweetland. Today, we're joined by former CSIS Intelligence Officer Andrew Kirsch, who is now retired but has a plethora of details to share about his storied career. Here, with his new book, I Was Never Here, My True Canadian Spy Story of Coffees, Codenames, and Covert Operations in the Age of Terrorism. The book is available for purchase everywhere now. Andrew, welcome to Tough Topics. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks so much for having me, Vonnie. It's great to be here.
Yes, thanks so much for joining us. I know it's an early morning. Let's jump right into it. You're a former Canadian Security Intelligence Service officer. For many of us, I would like to think we imagine people like Bruce Willis, Mark Wahlberg, but in reality, the superhero Canadian agents are names we've never heard of, I'm assuming.
Yes, we're just kind of regular, average, ordinary, everyday people, just like you and myself. I signed up years ago, and in a fit of public service to get involved, and worked at CSIS for just under a decade as an intelligence officer in Ottawa and Toronto. And it's not much is known about the intelligence service or the people that work there, and I felt like, maybe we can have a little bit more. I think it's in the public's interest to have a better understanding of what the intelligence service does and what it's like to work there. So for future generations of people who want to get involved, have this kind of reference in a book to read about what it's like to do that and work there.
And what was some of your earliest experiences working as one of these agents? I would imagine it probably was a very pressured sort of environment.
Well, that's one of the things I talk about is kind of my career. And I had a good one. I started off in Ottawa as an analyst. And so many people kind of, as you said, think about the Jason Bourne and the James Bond, but there's also desk officers, analysts in windowless offices, reading memos, overseeing national security investigations. I was one of those for a couple of years in Ottawa, and then kind of advanced to a regional field investigator where I was out knocking on doors, asking people for help with national security investigations. That a little more of that a joke, the kind of coffees and conversations business. Right. And then at the end of my career, I was in the special operations, which were the clandestine, warranted invocation of warranted powers, which is what people really imagine of that, going places you're not supposed to be to get information that you might, if it wasn't sanctioned by a judge, be entitled to, and furthering investigations in that way. So I really kind of had a great career, spun a number of different desks, and I think try to give the impression of the people that, you can have the desk work, the field investigator work, and kind of all
encompassing. And so what kind of personality do you need to have to go into that field? I couldn't do it. I'm telling you, I'd have anxiety every day.
Well, there's that, but you'd be great because your interpersonal skills and be able to talk to people, and that's really a big part of it, is going out in the public, talking to the community, having those conversations, and say, look, I'm here from Canadian Security Intelligence Service. I need some help with a national security investigation, and can I talk to you? Can I get your help? Will you share with me some information that I think could be of value? So you absolutely need the outgoing, the people who are comfortable knocking on doors and having those conversations. And then also there is an analytic piece where somebody who is able to read reports, synthesize large amounts of information, to be able to kind of interpret that and then understand where gaps are in direct investigation. So from the intelligence officer perspective, which is where I was, you need that kind of analytic part, and then the social butterfly part as well. And of course, CSIS has other roles such as surveillance and communications analysts, all types. But yeah, it can get a little stressful. Absolutely. And that's one of the challenges of being there. And then not being able to share with people who are you're close with, what those stresses are, not being able to talk to family and friends about, if the day was a good day or a bad day and what made it so.
Right. And I would imagine your closest relatives wouldn't even know the nature of your work because, of course, it would be classified.
Yes. So even the people who knew where I worked, like my wife and they wouldn't know what I did there or what I was going to do. And there were, at the end of my career, I was going out at 11 p.m. to 4 in the morning, and I couldn't tell my wife where I was going, what I was doing, where I was going to be and when I was going to be home. And so that creates a number of challenges.
I would imagine that would be just a pressured
Yeah.
situation and hard for family to understand. So much to unpack with Andrew Kirsch just after these messages. We're back with Andrew Kirsch. Andrew, what would you consider to be an honest challenge with respect to keeping a country safe from terrorism, particularly Canada, and what do you think we need to be doing going forward? And I think we'll also say domestic terrorism, because that's been all of the focus as of late.
Yeah, it is a big challenge, and I'd say that we live in an overall very safe country, and I don't think it's important for people to know it's not because there aren't challenges, but because there are people who are working very hard to keep it so. And so it's acknowledging that we do have issues, and as we are seeing, and I'm not saying that's terrorism or not, but that there are security concerns, and we have a national security, law enforcement that get up every day to do their best to make sure that those don't become bigger issues. So I think there's a general awareness. Sometimes we can get a little complacent, the public can, to think, things can't happen here and we're okay.
Yeah.
But no, we need to still stay vigilant, work with our intelligence services, support them to make sure that we are safe and we stay that way. So that's, I think, number one. We have that kind of challenge is.
Yeah, and it's not just, when we think of terrorism, of course, people immediately think to 9/11 and events like that, but there's also domestic, homegrown terrorism.
Well, absolutely. I think even about the span of my career. When I signed up, I was living in London, working in finance at the time, and we had the London bombing attacks of 2005. And at that time, post 9/11, 2005, in Toronto, we had the Toronto 18 that were going to blow up things domestically. That was a big concern. We've had challenges here domestically that we have had to thwart, and we're seeing a bit of a change into what the issues are that galvanize people around those grievances. And it's right-wing extremism. That kind of is that the current challenge? Absolutely, we're seeing that challenge here. We have kind of all the old hits as well, and something we need to be conscious of and not take our eye off the ball.
Left-wing extremism as well. I think there's all sorts of extremism, and it would probably propose a lot of challenges because, again, you have folks that are also coming across borders. Here in Canada, you might have people coming from the U.S. and vice versa. Well,
that was, I was saying from 2006, where domestic extremism, we were worried about attacks in Canadian soil. When Iraq and Syria started to destabilize, and later on in the decade, and we saw this challenge of foreign fighters, people who were traveling abroad to get engaged in conflicts overseas. Canadians who were going and causing some damage overseas, and that was a big concern to our domestic intelligence services. They would go and cause problems, that also come back trained, with contacts and do things here. And so I think we're seeing that still with the left and the right, which is, are people traveling to get engaged in foreign conflicts? Are they bringing that back? Are people coming to engage in our foreign conflicts? Is that a concern? Something we absolutely have to keep our eyes on going forward and be very aware of what those threats are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think right now we are in this hyper-partisan political world where politics has become very divisive. And I think it's actually charging people and fueling them to engage in more extremism. Would you say that politics has sort of fueled some of that as of recent?
Well, I think I don't want to get too far into the politics and responsibility, but I think that what's changed a great deal is the explosion of social media from my time there to what we're seeing online now. And whether that is our own politics or foreign interference that we are seeing as well, and just the hyper-partisan nature and of what we're able to see and what people are able to kind of self-radicalize with almost, right? And whatever that is, where that's coming from, who's fueling that, and people digging in. I think that creates a challenge. Absolutely, as far as
we've seen that in the 2016 election in the U.S.
Yeah, that's it's been established that foreign interference is happening. CSIS has noted this in their public reports that's a concern for them and something they keep close eyes on, and something in this current protests of how much is foreign interference, what is foreign interference doing, and something that they would absolutely monitor as part of their mandate. So, borders are porous in themselves, but online, I mean, that's
and you need the support of social media companies.
Absolutely. It's a huge problem, or I'd say the huge challenge to deal with is this flood of information. What's real? What's being shared? How are people, reacting to that? And how is that fueling any kind of out there ideology, possible outcomes from that?
More with former CSIS Intelligence Officer Andrew Kirsch just after this break. Thank you for joining us. Andrew, you called your previous work the world's second oldest profession in your book. Can you explain that, just the history and how it applies to present time?
Well, that's the joke is that the spying intelligence, it's the second oldest profession in the world that, it's been around forever. And I think it's, that is the case. And it's proven to be because of its relevance. I think it's incredibly relevant today as it was before. We look at what's happening now, and for whatever we think about the outcomes, I think that intelligence and information gathering is to provide decision makers with information to make better decisions. So of course they want more information and more intelligence so they can make better risk-informed decision making. That's been forever. So I think that's why it's been around, and obviously. That's kind of the quip of it's the second, and of course.
Right. And for folks who want to get into this industry, I guess the whole point of your book is to let them know that it's a very attainable and achievable career.
Absolutely. When I joke, I wish I had a cool story that I was recruited in some graduate studies class, but the reality is I applied online. When I was living in London and working in finance, and the bombs were going off and I wanted to get involved, I Googled, how do I become a Canadian spy? It was not more complex than that, and went through the steps. And when I did, I realized there's not a lot of information about what it is what CSIS is, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, what it does, what it's like to work there. And so I wanted to pass that along to the next generation. I get asked a lot of questions about my experience. How did I get in? What did I do? Why I left? And these are all things that I think would be helpful to people who are interested in a career. Maybe think about a road not traveled, or just are curious about what Canadian spies do, and what's that like. We have a lot of CIA books and Mossad books, and maybe we can have a CSIS book.
Right. And what are some of the key takeaways from the book? If viewers go and purchase the book tonight, what are they going to take away from this read?
Well, I think they would be very, sometimes we have this idea of the single spy running around, doing everything themselves. And I hope what I'm able to articulate is it's a real team effort. There are a lot of different people at CSIS. There's the intelligence officers, there's surveillance, communications analysts, the human sources, the people we meet with, the folks like myself who are back in a policy room reviewing the reports. So there's a whole apparatus that is working hard and working together. And then also that we rely so much on the public. I go out, I'd say, knocking on doors, showing my badge, saying, my name is Andrew. I'm here from CSIS and I need your help. And, for the most part, I was received with a blank stare. And I'd say, CSIS, we investigate threats. And people would say, oh, the police. I'd say, not exactly. We're intelligence service. And I would go through, what it is. So I also hope that maybe a few more people become familiar with CSIS, the important work that it does as a part of the intelligence community. And so when the next intelligence officer knocks on the door and they say, oh, I'm here, okay, yes, I have some broad understanding of what you do. And Andrew seemed nice, and your work seems important. I'm happy to help you. So that's
well, I
really,
also would imagine that's not the kind of knock you would want at your door.
We get a lot of surprise people, and of course, the first question is, "Why are you here? Why do you want to talk to me?" And so that's one of the things too to explain. Look, we ask for help from the public. You haven't done anything wrong. We think you have information. We think you would be willing to help us. And I hope that we can have a conversation. So that's absolutely that. I'd say I spend most of my time frightening and then reassuring the 99% of the public that is, very, very law-abiding and well-being in Canada and all these things, while I was searching for the 1% that wanted to do Canada harm. So that, and we rely on the public for that very, very much.
Yes, lots of cooperation. And I would imagine that cooperation extends to our foreign counterparts as well, working with the US and other nations.
Absolutely. So, one of the things I also try to explain is that Canada doesn't have a foreign intelligence service, right? We are exclusively a domestic security service. And so we must work very closely with our counterparts, the Five Eyes community, the Americans, the British, the Australians, the New Zealand, extremely, extremely close to share information where appropriate and where we can, because we rely on it. We're obviously a small to our neighbor, to our American neighbor, and we work closely with them because we have a shared interest in national security and ours in North American security. But absolutely, they big part of the intelligence family.
A riveting discussion, and so much more with Andrew Kirsch just after these messages. We're back with Andrew Kirsch. Andrew, I want to ask you about the recent trucker convoy that is occupying Ottawa and Toronto as we speak, and of course other prominent border crossing areas in Ontario. Some have described these actions as domestic terrorism, and others have also said they're worried about this issue becoming larger than it currently is. As someone who's spent their life and career fighting these realities, ensuring Canadians are safe, what are your thoughts on the trucker convoy, and do you think it presents any real danger?
Well, I won't talk legal definitions. My background's not in the law, but I can tell you this from the information intelligence community. When I was back in Ottawa working for CSIS, I said before, in a policy compliance role. We had very strict rules about gathering information intelligence on lawful advocacy, protest, and dissent. I think it's very clear, that we don't want law enforcement, national security investigating. Everyone here in Canada is welcome. We have the right to protest, we have the right to dissent, and so we have to be very clear about what people are allowed to do. And then when that crosses the line and becomes a problem, what kind of problem that is. And so I've seen, heard the calls for more robust responses. And that's something that the powers that be and law enforcement and politicians will need to make decisions about. And I hope they're making that with the best information that they have. That's one of the reasons why it's the second oldest profession in the world. We want to make sure that they know, who's there, what are those next steps, what are the goals of the groups, do they have any plans for, any illegal activities, and so if it reaches that threshold and they're able to investigate, they're providing that information, and you can see the benefit of it from what happened in Ottawa and what happened in Toronto. Right, I read that they thought it would be a 2-day protest. They would come in on Sunday, everyone would leave. And that's why they were allowed to kind of take position up very downtown and really get dug in. Whereas when there was talk of going to Toronto, and the Toronto had seen the experience and had that, foresight information that no, this was not just going to be a 2-day protest. They took more concrete steps to prevent that from happening. So as I said, I think that it's important that we are gathering, where appropriate, information on any threats that are there and relevant, passing that along as per the mandate, and making sure that if there are any threat actors, anything's planned, that we're dealing with those. Right.
Because more information is better.
Yeah, and as I said, I think that we want to make sure that things don't escalate and go in that direction. There are plenty of laws in place that I think that could deal with the situations as they are. I'd be nervous about creating new ones. I don't get to make those decisions, and people that do have some challenging decisions to make. But yeah, that certainly would be the concern that I saw this weekend that you're having protests and counter protests, and I'd be nervous about any time there's an escalation on both sides, and that's allowed, where people feel bold to take those decisions into their own hands. That's something that I would be uncomfortable with. But as I said, it is Yeah, I don't know how this ends. I hope it could be very peacefully and not in some sort of event or
And
kind of
hopefully
catastrophic
soon.
incidents. Well, absolutely. I think we're seeing that the more this goes on, the more emboldened people are becoming. We say that the law enforcement has their own intelligence gathering and information collection networks. We're seeing that they're getting very, very organized and be able to move parts and pieces around, maybe in some cases and maybe not. But I think as more people come in, as this is allowed to grow, I think it creates a broader challenge. Also with different groups with different mandates coming in too and mixing amongst themselves. I don't know how focused the convoy is as far as how they see this resolving. So from an intelligence collection, are you able to provide a single narrative like this is what's going to happen, or do you have too many groups involved now that it's just very tough to articulate where this could go?
All of the things that our law enforcement community is, of course, looking at right now. And hopefully these protests will end soon without any further escalation. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrew. And for everybody at home, please go and pick up a copy of I Was Never Here, My True Canadian Spy Story of Coffees, Code Names, and Covert Operations in the Age of Terrorism. You can pick it up online or at your local bookstore. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you so much for having me, Bonnie.
Of course. As always, I'm your host, Vonnie Sweetland, and today we've discussed the importance of terrorism and homegrown terrorism, but it's not simply enough to label one group or the other. We gotta sit, talk, listen, and understand all perspectives before we can render a true verdict on what is taking place. But thank you to our law enforcement communities who are here keeping us safe, and thank you to Andrew Kirsch for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and as always, all voices matter.